All right, and if I can hold on to you, thank you. Old age brings caution. Thank you.
Great. Okay, can everyone hear me? Aloha.
Aloha.
It is wonderful to see you all this morning. Good morning, and welcome to the student question and answer session for the Jurist-in-Residence program. Do you mind if I impose upon you so I can read this? Today we are joined by Associate Justice Sonia Sotomayor. Justice Sotomayor was born in the Bronx, New York, on June 25th, 1954. She earned her Bachelor of Arts in 1976 from Princeton University, graduating summa cum laude as a member of Phi Beta Kappa. She also received the Pine Prize, the highest academic honor that Princeton bestows upon an undergraduate student. In 1979, she earned a JD from Yale Law School, where she served as an editor of the Yale Law Journal. She served as assistant district attorney in the New York City County District Attorney's Office from 1979 through 1984. She then litigated international commercial matters in New York City at Pavia and Harcourt, where she served as an associate and then as a partner from 1984 through 1992. In 1991, President George H.W. Bush nominated her to the United States District Court, Southern District of New York, and she served in that role from 1992 through 1998. In 1997, she was nominated by President Bill Clinton to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, where she served from 1998 through 2009. President Barack Obama nominated her as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court on May 26, 2009, and she assumed this role on August 8, 2009. Professor Kamaile Turchan will be moderating this session. Thank you, Kamaile, with the Justice. Professor Turchan is an alumna of Richardson Law, and we are so pleased to have her back with us as a faculty member. She returned to teach here, as many of you know, in the summer of 2023. Kamaile previously was an attorney at NOAA, in their office of the General Counsel here in Hawaii, and clerked for both Justice David Ezra of the United States District Court and Judge Richard Clifton of the Ninth Circuit. Just prior to joining the faculty here at Richardson Law, Kamaile was a partner at the law firm of Jones Day in Washington, D.C. But what initially took her from us and dashed her off to Washington, D.C. was her clerkship with Justice Sotomayor during the Supreme Court's 2016-2017 term. So with that, please let me turn it over to Professor Turchan. Thank you all.
Well, aloha kako and good morning, everyone. The Jurist-in-Residence program provides our Richardson students a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to interact directly with a sitting United States Supreme Court justice. And I am personally just delighted to be moderating this morning's Q&A with Justice Sotomayor. Justice, I first met you back in 2012 when you were here visiting our campus for the first time, and it is such an honor to be introducing you to our wonderful students once again. Welcome, Justice. We are happy to have you.
Thank you.
Well, absolutely, everyone is just eager to hear from you, so I will just get us started, if I may, with
absolutely
moderator privilege here to ask the first question. Well, so here at Richardson, we encourage our students to think critically about what it means to work in the pursuit of justice. I'd like to know your thoughts on what does the pursuit of justice mean to you? And has your thinking on that changed or evolved over time with your various positions as prosecutor, litigator, district court judge, Second Circuit, and now Supreme Court justice.
I've been thinking about how to answer this question. And I thought that perhaps, because I'm in a law school, I might talk more about, well, let me start from the beginning, okay? I joined the DA's office after law school. Contrary to the expectations of most of my law school cohorts, who thought the pursuit of justice meant being a public defender of some sort, or a defender in the criminal justice system. I had a very naive idea that had grown from watching Perry Mason when I was a child. And in one episode of Perry Mason and Berger, the long-suffering prosecutor who always lost to Perry Mason, was there. And Perry went up to him, or they met at the door or something, and said to him, it must be very frustrating to put so much work into a case and then lose it. And Berger turned to him and said, not really. The advantage of being a prosecutor is that you are there to ensure that only the guilty are convicted. And if that means an innocent person is acquitted, then justice has been done. And believe it or not, that idea stayed with me. And that concept of what justice should be, at least in the criminal law sector, resonated with what I thought of as justice in the law. And this concept has not changed that fundamentally, Kamali. For me, it meant in law that every participant is doing their role as carefully and with as much attention and as much commitment to doing the right thing on every side of a dispute. And so prosecutors, in working diligently to ensure that only the guilty are properly convicted under due process of law, and that defense attorneys on the other side were providing the best defense they could for those accused, and who ensured and tested the system to make sure that it was convicting someone in accordance with law and its processes, that was justice. And in fact, if you look even now at my jurisprudence, I think you know it better than anyone else, or equally to most other people. Most of my writing centers around errors in process. You know, if you can almost identify, certainly from denials of certiorari where I write, virtually all of them are centered around fundamental flaws in the process that the individual received. To me, that's the greatest injustice. You see, I can't protect people from the application of law to their actions. And so you don't, and people think that I'm opposed to the death penalty, but there are many cases where I'm voting to uphold convictions that result in death penalty punishments. And I vote that way because I believe that that person has received a fundamentally fair process. I write when I think the process has not given them justice in that sense of the word. So on a larger scale, you can't really be a judge and be one that could sustain your having to rule against people when your personal feelings might not have done it. But you can't be a part of that process unless you have a sense of justice that gives you a sort of grounding in terms of what this process can accomplish. Neither I've said often and repeatedly, judges are not gods. We don't judge based on morality. And we don't judge on concepts of fairness that is abstract, that is human. And we can't do that because what laws are societal guideposts of what society thinks is a fair way for people to have relationships with each other. In individual application, that fairness is going to fail because laws are not taking into account individuals. Laws are taking into account human relationships. And as a result, in application, there are going to be what people perceive as unjust results. But that doesn't mean that they're unjust in the process that law involves. And you have to rely, as I do as a judge, in hoping that there are other avenues in the society in which a more just outcome might be given. So in death penalty cases, for example, and I'm only using it as an example, you hope that the clemency process can catch some of those injustices. And in some places it does, in some places it doesn't, but you have to have faith in that part of the process. So I think that when you think as students about what the pursuit of justice is, you have to think situationally in where are you, what are you doing, and what does that process provide to the people you're serving.
Thank you, Justice. And I hope that our civil procedure and criminal procedure students in particular were paying close attention to that answer. Okay.
I don't know if you'll be tested on it, but
All right, well, sort of along this vein, we do have our first question from one of our students about diversity in our profession. Leah?
Aloha, and thank you for being here. My name is Leah. I'm a 3L. Here at Richardson, we pride ourselves on being a Native Hawaiian place of learning. Can you speak to what you see as the value of a diverse bench, and by extension, a diverse pool of law clerks, including the hiring of the first Native Hawaiian law clerk? Thank you.
Tell you a story. Kamaili knows I'm a storyteller. During my nomination process to the Supreme Court, you may not remember that there was an organized campaign resisting my confirmation. And at the time, there were some very hurtful attacks on my character, but most importantly, on my worth. There were people who said I wasn't smart enough to be a Supreme Court justice. And there were others who suggested I would be a lackluster justice, contributing very little to our jurisprudence. That was exceedingly hurtful. It's painful to read things like that about what people think about you. And I was both hurt and sensitive to the attacks and thinking, are they right? There's always some sense of, you have to question yourself and what you've done and what you can accomplish in any position you undertake. One of my friends knew of my unhappiness and came up to me and said, Sonia, get over yourself. This isn't about you. She said, this opportunity is about my 8-year-old daughter. And my friend is a Puerto Rican. We share a commonality. and her daughter is obviously Puerto Rican and half black. But it's about my 8-year-old daughter, and it's about the dreams she can have. And whether she can see someone in a position like this one and say, I can do anything too. And she said, that's what your being nominated to the court means. That there will be other children of color who will believe more in the American dream than if they don't see themselves on the bench. And I realized she was right. Having people that look like you, even if they're not you, and even if they don't necessarily represent your community or necessarily represent what you believe, but just seeing people like you in positions is very inspiring to young people. Not only inspiring, but necessary. And that's the word, what diversity means to me. It is a necessary result of education. It is what is required of education. To have doors open sufficiently so everyone of every background can feel that they're an active part of the society, and that they're an active part of the work the society does to influence everyone's life. And so, for me, not just in terms of the effects it's had on my own career and the opportunities I've been provided, but it's a requirement for me in terms of what I do to ensure when I'm selecting law clerks or when I'm working at being on committees on the court to select individuals to lead court offices, that I'm equally looking at that opportunity for everyone. But that's what it takes to have a diverse society. It takes the sensitivity of people in positions of power to open the door for everyone. And I know, and I tell this to people openly, when I first became a justice, there were very few women in positions of power. In 1979, when I graduated from law school, there wasn't a woman on the Supreme Court yet. Sandra Day O'Connor came in 81, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg came in 92, 93, or 94. It was a while later. There were no women on the Supreme Court of New York State. There were hardly any women on Supreme Courts across the country. I had to rely on men of goodwill to promote my career. And they did. You'll read my book and know how many male mentors I had. But it really was necessary, not just for there to be Hispanics in my life, but for there, or women, but for there to be men who understood the importance of diversity as well. And so it is all our jobs, no matter what your background, to ensure that diversity exists in our society. Thank you, Leah.
Well, Justice, we are so happy and lucky to have you on the bench, and you have undoubtedly impacted so many lives. And we have a number of questions.
I'm very pleased that I have one Hawaiian law clerk, and I have one law clerk who is living in Alaska now.
Oh, there you go. See,
Yeah,
geographic,
geographic and
diversity, all kinds.
For me, diversity means a lot of...
Absolutely.
It doesn't mean just ethnicity. It does mean diversity in the type of people that I hire. And I think, as you know, I have people in law firms, I have people working in law schools as professors. I have people in government and nonprofit work. To me, that is also important.
Right, absolutely. I mean, myself and my 3 other law clerks that year, quite a variety of backgrounds and interests in where to go in the future. And so, we try to spread this approach across the profession. But speaking particularly to your time on the bench, we have a number of questions and a lot of interest from our students on that. And so our next question is from Jessie Lynn.
Hello, Jess.
Aloha kakakiyaka. Good morning, Justice. My name is Jessie Lynn. I'm a 1L. I have several questions to you that build off of each other, and they are, did you attend law school hoping to become a Supreme Court justice one day? If not, what led you to becoming a judge? What advice would you give to those of us who want to become judges or justices in the future?
No. I did not expect to become a Supreme Court justice. Well, first start with, and all of you should know I like walking around, sitting bores me. So if somebody can come help me down, thank you. First start with my childhood. I grew up in a housing project in the South Bronx, okay? Housing projects are projects for poor people. And there were no lawyers or judges in my neighborhood. Equally as important, our only exposure to law was not a good situation. It was when a relative or friend was arrested. And so the idea of law really was not something I was exposed to or knew much about. It was Perry Mason that led me to be introduced to the concept of lawyering. It was Perry Mason and a realization I had watching the show at about 12 or 13 years old. Here, Perry Mason works the entire show to prove his client is not guilty. And he does it in a courtroom. And by the way, I've been a judge now for 30 years and a lawyer before that for 12. And in my 42 or 43 years of being in the legal profession, I have never been exposed to, read about, or known about a case in which a guilty party admitted it in court. All right? And someone got off because of that. All right? So it's a bit unrealistic, Perry Mason was. But in one show at the end of it, I watched Perry Mason break down a witness who admitted he committed the crime. And he then turned to the judge and said, I ask that the charges against my client be dismissed and that he be released from bail. And I paused, and here I am, 12 or 13, and said to myself, Perry Mason did all this work. And yet, who was the party who had the last word? It was the judge. And again, that simple child's realization stuck with me. And then I go to college, and I start reading about the civil rights movement. I was a historian. I was a Latin American historian, so I wasn't really studying American history that much, but I took a couple of American history courses. And I'm there in the 1970s, from 72 to 76. And it's the tail end of the heavy part of the civil rights movement. But it is the time when I'm reading about Southern judges, the Southern federal judges, who were involved in integrating schools. And as you may remember, Brown ended with the exhortation that there be integration with all due deliberate speed. There's a lot of controversy over whether the court should have given time for integration or should have ordered immediate integration. I'm not going to get into that substantive discussion. But it was still ongoing in the 60s, later 60s, and early 70s. And these men, all of them were men, there were no women back then, who had grown up in a segregated society, for whom culturally their entire network of support, their families, their friends, the society they were immersed in and lived in, believed in segregation and believed in the inferiority of other races. And yet these men took their oath of office as judges and understood that no matter what their personal predilections, feelings were, that they had an obligation to uphold the law. And one after another forced the institutions in their society to desegregate. And they did it with personal threats being made against their lives. Every one of them had their lives and those of their family members threatened. Many of them had crosses burnt on their front lawns. And despite this, they upheld the law. And so I go to college with the thought, that is what I want to be, that kind of judge someday. And that did lead me to enter law school, thinking ultimately that I might want to become a judge. But frankly, I'm in law school, I'm reading Supreme Court decisions, and I'm knowing how important they are. But, being on that court seemed really far off. And being on that court where there are no women or people of color, well, there was one, Thurgood Marshall, but there's only one, and it's all men. The thought that that was a possibility just didn't enter my mind. You live by example, and there was no example for me to look to. And so maybe I should have had bigger dreams. Maybe I should have known better and set my sights that high, but I didn't. I just accepted that I could have a life as a lawyer, and I might even make it to being a trial judge somewhere. Even Perry Mason had a woman judge. All right? But it was a trial judge. And so I did have the thought in college of becoming a judge. So I'll tell you another story. I'm full with stories, okay? So in my, I think it might have been my second year, or maybe it was my first, I applied for a summer position at a civil rights organization, to not be named publicly, okay? And one of the questions the interviewer asked me is, what's your 5-year plan as a lawyer when you graduate? And I said to him, I don't really know right now. That's why I'm here. I want to experience different things in law school and decide what that plan will be. But I do have a 15, 20-year plan. And he looked at me and he said, what's that? And I said, I want to be a federal district court judge. And I told him basically what I told you as to why I wanted to do that. Fine, I finished the interview. One of my friends from Princeton, who had graduated ahead of me and had gone to law school ahead of me and was working at this organization, was there while they were evaluating the summer applicants. And the interviewer said, oh, she's clearly really smart. She's done wonderfully in college and law school, but I think she might be a little naive and needs some seasoning. She imagines she can be a federal district court judge someday. Well, that story stopped me from ever telling anyone else what my dreams were. And I didn't. When I was leaving Bob Morgenthau, he called me in. He said, Sonia, stay with my office. I can make you a judge. And I said, I don't want to do that. I don't know if I was lying at the time, but I do know that I didn't want to be a state judge. And I didn't know how to tell him that. So I just said no, okay? So the answer is, I think, to your ultimate question, which is answering your last part. What advice do I give you as a law student about your dreams? Which is, don't be limited the way I was. Big dreams are possible to achieve. Dreams bigger than the ones you can have are possible to achieve. Because I'm living proof of that, okay? I never dreamt of being on the Supreme Court, and sort of sometimes I wake up and think, is this real? I certainly thought that a lot my first year on the court. I would wake up and say, when am I going to wake up from this dream, you know? And I didn't wake up, thank God. Or maybe I did, but it was still real. But my point is, how do you get there? What do you do to reach those dreams? And I think what I did, and so I can only give you advice that was successful for me. Whether it'll work for you, you'll have to figure out. But I think it's sound advice. I never spent my time worried about reaching dreams. I spent my time working as hard as I could each day in whatever job I was in to be the best that I could be at that work. And so when I was in the DA's office, it wasn't until 4.5 years later where I realized, okay, I maybe haven't mastered being the greatest lawyer, but I have worked very hard during these 4.5 years to develop my skills as a trial lawyer. And I think I was a pretty good trial lawyer. And I went and saw how different people did their work and developed the skills that I thought necessary to be a great trial lawyer. And I had reached sort of the place where I thought I wasn't going to get much better, at least in that position. And I then ended up realizing I didn't want to be in criminal law, because for our communities, once our kids enter the criminal justice system, it is so much a revolving door. And especially now, there is so little emphasis on rehabilitation, and it was happening then. And I was thinking to myself, this is the bad end of the process. I need to be working in a process where I can offer hope. And so I started thinking I should go into business law, and I should start developing the skills to assist in community developing. That's what I did. I moved into a civil law firm that was involved in business activities. And then I started to serve on board of directors that were devoted to community building. So I went on the State of New York Mortgage Agency, which gave out low-interest loans for people to own homes. And I worked very diligently with its president to develop a low-income housing project. And I was very proud of being able to be a part of that. I got into the New York City Campaign Finance Board, and they gave public monies to candidates to run for public office. And that permitted people with lesser means, like most people of color were as candidates, to have some resources to tap into and run campaigns. And that was, and still is, a very successful program in New York City. We have one of the most diverse representative bodies in the nation in our elected offices, and a lot of that has to do with the Campaign Finance Board. And I was also a member of the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund, and that was our community's civil rights organization. And I was on the board literally until I became a judge. And I was very proud of the work that organization did and that I was playing a role in it. And so become the best lawyer you can. Take every job you take seriously. Do your very best to learn as much as you can in each position you're in, so that you can take those skills and apply them in other settings. And do that. when you join an organization, make a difference. That's how people notice you. When I hire law clerks, I'm looking for people with passion, but I don't define the area of passion that has to be in. I looked at Kamili's resume. For her back then, it was environmental law. She switched, I think, almost completely now. All right?
I still
But I
feel
wasn't.
my heart.
But I wasn't looking for that. What I was looking for was that passion that reflected in her work. She was writing articles. I picked up a couple of the articles and I read them. They were beautifully and understandably written. And I thought, that's a law clerk I want. All right? If you're here in law school, you have to, whatever activity you join, you do it well. Make a difference. Prove that you have leadership qualities by improving whatever situation you're in. That will draw people's attention to you. It was all those people I met in all of those organizations who recommended me first to President Bush and then to President Clinton and ultimately to President Obama, because I knew people from such a diverse variety of settings, and all of them were able to talk about the things that I had done when I was a part of their group. And so for me, that's how you become anything, not just a judge. It's how you get to whatever position you're looking for. Do the best you can in where you are, and the success will follow. It will lead ahead of you. How's that? All right. I'm going to walk down this aisle. Move in. I'm not that heavy.
Well, Justice, if you have a bit more time.
You know I do. Go ahead.
Well, you've given us such a wonderful overview of the path that led you to where you are, and perhaps because of your singular background, you've done quite a bit of writing. You've written books, including for for folks in our next generation. And so our next question is from Xiaoyi.
Go ahead. Now, I didn't hear the name, so turn around so I can see your face and put it to a name.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for being here. My name is Xiaoyi. I'm
Xiaoli?
Xiaoyi.
Xiaoli. I'll probably say it wrong, so I'll stop.
Okay. So my question is, what inspired you to write Just Help? Is there a sequel in the works, or maybe any other writing endeavors?
Well, each of the books, children's books that I've written, has had a story, so I'll tell you all the stories and how they all flow together, okay? I wrote my memoir, My Beloved World. It came out in 2013. I wasn't thinking of writing a children's book because there was already a children's book about me that came out, I think within the year I was a justice. And it's called The Judge Grows Up in the Bronx. And I thought it was such a wonderful book, and it really is. There's a couple of things in it that I wouldn't have done, but basically it's a good book. And so I didn't think I needed to do a children's book. The editor came to me and said, we want one. And there's a market for it. You should do a book. My next answer was, how can I write my whole life in a children's book? A children's book is something like, it is 1,900 words. You have 12 vignettes, and that's it. That's the formula for a children's book. That's as much as children can absorb. And so knowing that, they're the one who came up with the idea and said, your book is filled, your adult book is filled with stories about how books affected your life, how words and books affected your life. And I said, oh, that I could do. And hence, Turning Pages, My Life Story, was born. I still wasn't convinced. It's a lot of work to write a book. And I was thinking, do I have the time for this? What impact is it really going to make? And I went and I said to them, you know, I have a book in my head that's been there for over 30 years, And if you accept that book, I'll do Churning Pages, because then it's worth it. All right? What was that book? Just Ask. And Just Ask has been probably, relative to the market, the most successful book that I've written. When I say relative to the market, My Beloved World has sold very, very well. And Just Ask is not far behind. And that's unheard of in children's books. Because most families buy one book for the entire family and friends. Adult books, people will buy, husbands and wives don't even share books sometimes. They each buy one, okay? So the fact that Just Ask has been so popular, that was an idea born from an experience I had when I was in my 30s. I grew up with juvenile diabetes, and as some of you may or may not know, there are two kinds of diabetes, type 1, which is juvenile, and type 2, which is adult onset. They bear a similar name, diabetes, but they're very, very different. Both their care, type 1s always survive on taking insulin, either by a shot or a pump into their body. Adults can take oral medication. But more importantly, the pathos of juvenile diabetes is more a burden. At any rate, I had kept it a secret because I was born in a generation and time where if you had illnesses of any kind, you hid it. Nobody ever talked about it. And so I took my morning shot every morning, but my friends knew I had diabetes but really didn't know what it meant. But at any rate, I kept it a secret. And I would go to dinner and I would look at the menu and what I was eating, decide how much insulin I needed, and I'd go to the bathroom and privately give myself a shot. This particular evening, there was nobody in the small stall that I was in, so I did it in the public area. And as I had my arm, the needle in my arm, a woman walks in. I nod to her. I take the needle out. I put the cap on. I take it apart and put it in my kit and put it away. As the evening ended, I'm walking past her table, and I hear her whisper to her office mate, to her dinner mate, she's a drug addict. Bit of a stage whisper, okay? And I tell kids, my first reaction was stopping, which I did, and I must have flushed in redness and embarrassment. And then I explained to kids, I got righteous indignation. And I walked back to the table and I looked at her and I said, Madam, I'm not a drug addict. I'm a diabetic. And you saw me taking medicine that saves my life. It wasn't drugs. It's drugs, but good drugs. And I said to her, why do you assume the worst in people? If you see them doing something you don't understand, why don't you just ask them why? So remember the title, Just Ask. So that was the second book. And why did I want to write that book? Because in just a few years before, my assistant at the time, she was my assistant for 28 and a half years. She ultimately retired. But at the time, she had a granddaughter who had Tourette's syndrome. And she had told me a story of being in a store where her granddaughter had had a twirling fit. It was, involuntary motion is what happens to Tourette's people. And so she would spin and spin and spin and spin and spin until the nervous tick that's part of her life stopped, and she would fall to the floor and then pick herself up. A woman walked by her and said, don't you have a mother who teaches you how to behave? She did have a mother who taught her how to behave. Her mother put her in the car and then gave the woman a piece of her mind. But the incident relived my moment. And then I have a law clerk who had a son who had every allergy imaginable. And he was in preschool, And they had decided that the way to keep him safe was to segregate him from his classmates at lunch, put him at a single table with a teacher, and he would come home every night crying about being isolated. And I knew I needed a book that would teach people not to devalue those of us in the society with conditions that are different than what you're used to. And so Just Ask has 12 vignettes about children with different conditions, including allergies like Nolan. And Nolan explains that he uses his voice now to tell people why he can't eat nuts and why they're dangerous for him, and to help him by telling him if what they're giving him has nuts or not. And I have a child with Tourette's syndrome who talks about the frustration of people looking at her like she's doing something that she should be able to control, but she can't. And so I have vignettes like that in that book. So just help. So what I'm doing is writing children's books about messages that are important to me. It is somewhat selfish, but they seem to have worked. And I'm very, very involved in civic education and promoting it in schools. When Sandra Day O'Connor retired, well, shortly after she retired from the court, I went to a recognition award evening, and they spoke about her work with iCivics, which is a program that teaches middle school children civics through gaming. It's a video game. And I invite all of you to go to the iCivics.org website and play the games. And if you score 100%, I'm going to pat you on the back. But I bet most of you don't. All right? At any rate, I had joined the iCivics board after she was no longer functioning enough to sustain the organization. But I conditioned it on them translating the games into Spanish. And she had a hope that it would reach 10 million children. I think we're almost there. And the translations have helped deliver it to kids of my background. And so I've been very proud of it, and it's expanded now. It has some materials for primary school kids, it has high school lessons, and it has college lessons now. So I'm very proud of that work. But I knew the next book after Just Ask was going to be one about service. And so Just Help was born. And as you see, it starts with service not being defined in big terms, because it's what most people think of as public service, government jobs, not-for-profit jobs. Most of us don't realize that service is something much more granular. It is improving community in big and small ways, small steps as well. And so if you will remember, the book starts with the bus driver helping me, Sonia, onto the bus by taking my heavy bag. And my two classmates sitting there, and there are no seats, and them squeezing together to let me sit too. Then I have the kids in a gym doing a gym project together. And I have kids doing singular projects and joint projects in the hopes of teaching through that book that service shouldn't be looked at so narrowly, that it is community building step by step. And so that was Just Help. So the last question you asked me was, is there something more in the offing? Yes, there is Just Shine, which I hope will be the title. Just Ask, my publisher wanted to change, and I kept saying no, no. And then their book title team got together and said, oh no, we like it. Just ask, be brave, be different, be you. So I won out, they won out, okay? But Just Shine is about my mother who passed away in 2021 after a 7-month illness. And needless to say, losing my mother was pretty significant to me, still is. But in talking at my memorial services about her, people would say to me, "You're just like your mom." And I would say, well, if I am, it's because she taught me how to be me. And so I decided that there were valuable lessons she had imparted to me about how to be a better person in life, and that they were lessons that I think are important for kids to know. And so Just Shine is about those life lessons, and they include simple lessons like how to listen to people and why it's important, how to be a friend and why that's important, how to be forgiving. Those are the lessons of this book, and I'm hoping, well, so far my publisher loves it, so I hope it'll be okay.
Well, Justice, as I'm listening to you, I hear a lot of what you're saying has something to do with being able to have a certain amount of empathy with others and connect, right, even across perhaps large divides. And so it brings to mind a question that quite a few of our students have asked me recently, and I believe my colleagues, in our roles as faculty, which is essentially the general state of divisiveness across the country, right? Can you maybe talk a little bit about, in our last few minutes this morning, what is your approach to working with those with whom you may disagree? And what advice do you have for our students who may be graduating in a year or two and are thinking about how to go out into the workforce and collaborate with others that they might have genuine differences of opinion with?
Now I don't remember if this story I'm going to tell was with one of your co-clerks or not. We'll talk about that privately later. But I had a clerk once who did not want to go to lunch with one of my judicial colleagues. And she said, "I so disagree with his judicial philosophy. I don't think I could be nice." And I basically said, "You got to go." It was an order. All right? I made it very clear this was not a choice. And I said, because you're going to come back torn, because you're going to like him as a person. And sure enough, she came back and she said, "I can't believe it, but you're right." And I said, "Yeah." And that is what one of the lessons my mother taught me, which is, and one that life has taught me, good people do bad things. If you're in criminal law and you look at defendants as devils incarnate, you're going to commit an injustice as a human being and as a judge. Because even defendants who have done the most heinous of acts, and I've had only one exception to this, okay? And it was a person that I really thought was evil. But I can't say that I have found that in every defendant who has appeared before me. Many of them have family and children who love them and to whom they have shown genuine kindness. So how do you square that with the horrible acts some of them commit? You realize that it's not just that good people do bad things, but good people can have ideas that are different than yours that you don't like and think are bad. And that's absolutely true. And I approach every person, absolutely every person in life, in every setting, trying to find the good in them. trying to find our commonality as human beings. And if you look, you will find it. You just have to look. And you have to be willing to accept that it's there. One of the most moving passages for me, and it really, I took from it something different than Shakespeare intended and that Shylock intended in his soliloquy in where he said, "Don't I bleed like everyone else?" And he was saying this in the end to explain the vengeance he was going to take against the people who discriminated against him. But I took that to, and understood it when I read it in high school, that he was talking about something I had begun to see, which was we are human beings together. We share common values. We can express thoughts in very different ways. And our ideas might be different, but those values exist. And I find them in every person I interact with. And if they know that I can judge them and not their ideas as reflecting their worth as people, they are more willing to work with me. They are much more willing to look at our differences and say, okay, is there a way to work through them? Is there a way that we can interact and still do it in a civilized, agreeable way and still be passionate about our differences, but without personalizing it to the extent that we destroy that human connection? And I think, Kamila, you saw that in the court. I think your co-clerk understood when I used to tell her, you're going to be really upset because he's a nice person. He's just not right. Not so hard to do that. How many of you have disagreed with your parents and said, I love you, but you're not right? How many times have they said, I love you, but boy, I want to kill you? And that is the approach you have to have. With that approach, you use the word empathy. You know, it caused me a lot of problems during my nomination process. People thought that was a dirty word, really, and they thought there was something wrong with a judge who was empathetic, and criticizing Obama for using that word and criticizing me because obviously it fit a judge like me. I cared too much about people. And that made no sense to me. I think empathy gives you the ability to look at someone and understand their viewpoint. If you want to be a good lawyer, I hope that you are able, before you stand up in court to defend or to promote a theory of yours, that you know your adversary's case better than they do. Because if you don't, you're going to lose. That's what a good lawyer is able to do. And that takes empathy. It takes understanding the strengths in the other side's arguments, understanding its human impact, and being able to counter it with your own, I don't want to use story to think it's something you're making up, but with your own theory and with your own version of events that puts theirs in a light that others are not going to accept, but they'll accept yours. But you can't do that unless you have empathy. You can't live in someone else's shoes unless you have that ability to be willing to do that and to forgive. I used that word earlier with what one of the lessons of Just Shine is forgiveness, because with that comes the ability to respond and to have and still have a relationship.
Well, Justice, I think that is a wonderful note to close our session with this morning. It
went too fast.
Well, luckily the day is not yet over. So we do have we have a couple more events. In particular, at 12:15, right outside Richardson faculty, staff, and students. We hope you join us. We will have our official welcome ceremony, several events during the day, and then in particular at 6:15, also in the courtyard this evening, will be our closing for the day.
So if you pose a question and didn't get it answered, catch me outside.
Yep, she'll be ready to talk.
I'm always ready to do that.
Yes. Mahalo for joining us this morning, and please join me in another round of applause.
Thank you.